Happy Saturday night, everybody. Are you ready to go? Yes, I'm just about ready. Okay, I guess you can all hear me. And so I am here, and I'm going to remove Joe Firestone live tonight, put it in the lobby. There we go. So how are things? Am I coming through loud and clear? Well, thank you for the welcome, folks. I'm seeing your welcome, and it is very welcome also. Okay, tonight I want to talk about the job guarantee once again, one of our favorite programs, one of our very favorite programs. And the reasons for that are multiple, and I hope they will come clear again tonight. I want to start by reporting that Keith Ellison ran a Twitter thread. I forget if it was beginning Friday night or on Saturday, but he started it off by saying, "I am for basic income. Who agrees? Who disagrees? Why?" And he did this at https:// Keith Ellison /status /898-307-043-2826-28608. And that was, I guess, Friday night. It was August 17th, 2017. I replied quickly to his tweet saying, "The devil is in the details, Keith. What BI proposal, basic income proposal, that is, do you favor?" And then I said, my preference is for a federal job guarantee at a true living wage, which of course is not a BI proposal at all, except my specific version does propose a basic income for those people who don't want to work in the market value sector, can't find work in the market value sector, and who don't want to work in the social value sector of the economy, which is the new sector set up by a job guarantee program. Okay, in my proposal, wages, and I tweeted this also, okay, in a second tweet to him, wages would be reasonably cost adjusted using the CPI. The program would be federally funded and locally run using the social entrepreneurial sector to create jobs. And then I said in the third tweet, people who did not want to join the job guarantee program, would get a BI at 2/3 of the living wage. So, for example, if the living wage were at $18, then the basic income would be at $12 an hour. I also said in that same tweet there would be good fringes in both programs, both the JG and BI programs. Why both? Because if basic income alone is given to all, and then in tweet 4, then there would likely be inflation because the basic income would not be tied to work validated by the community as having value. In other words, it would not necessarily be used for anything productive. Now, before you think, well, of course, if one is poor, one is going to use it for productive things, to spend um, Okay, so I'm back. Okay, I ran into a power glitch. Can anybody tell me whether they can hear me now and whether I'm back on? Anybody? I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. Hear you well. Roger that. Okay, you are back. Great. I'm glad I'm back. So where was I? I was at the fourth tweet. I said then there would likely be inflation because the basic income would not be tied to work validated by the community as having any value. So number 5, I then said, I don't want to assert tweet 4 too strongly because individual effort not recognized as having value before it is performed may later turn out, tweet number 6, to provide great value to all. So individuals working alone may produce something of great economic and social value. But if this doesn't happen too often, then inflation results from the extra injection of money into the economy, not accompanied by a sufficient productivity increase to compensate for that injection. Now, why would that be the case in this instance? Well, I handled that with another thread coming off of Keith's original statement. And there I said, in the first one of the new subthread, I said, I asked about details because a straight universal basic income entitlement for each American using at Scott Santon's $1,000 per month per person proposal is nearly $4 trillion per year. Then in a second tweet, I said, so if that's the type of UBI you like, then I have to ask, how will you fund $40 trillion over a 10-year period while avoiding inflation? And then a third tweet in the new subthread, how will you find enough funding to also pay for all the other things we need, such as HR 676, also programs stopping climate change, etc. Okay. That started getting me some responses from other people. One of those other people was Scott Santens, who surprisingly did not contradict me as I thought he would in terms of my saying that it was going to involve an injection of $4 trillion into the private sector. I thought that was surprising because in some blogs that he's done, he's been very careful to indicate that since there would be income taxes applied to the $1,000 a month, the new money that is the net financial asset to the economy, would amount to roughly only 900 billion a year, okay, and not to the $4 trillion. Well, of course, that would have gotten us into the details of the program that he proposes, which I wanted to do. The reason why I wanted to do it was because I was interested in exposing the complexity of this to Keith Ellison, whose overall thread this was. I wanted him to see that in order to bring down the total of net new money from $4 trillion a year to less than $1 trillion a year, it would be necessary to perhaps cut back spending and raise taxes and do various things to other entitlement programs that people might not like. And of course, in Scott's writing, he proposes that the UBI would not simply be given to people with no other adjustments, but that it would replace many of the safety net programs that we have now. In fact, he proposes the UBI with roughly no deficit spending. Okay, in his various articles, he proposes how the UBI would be paid for, because as far as I know, he's not a partisan of deficit spending, but seems to believe in a balanced budget. I wanted to expose that to Keith Ellison and to make it clear to him what the various gyrations were that he would have to go through to pass a UBI that gave every single American $1,000 a month as a right, man, woman, and child, all 325 million of us. Okay, now, of course, we are MMTers here, and we know the government can afford that from a solvency standpoint. But we also know that there are very real constraints on our spending, okay, on government spending, and that those constraints involve the real consequences of our spending. And if we were to inject on top of what we spend now, $4 trillion into the private sector, there probably would be a very serious inflation that would occur as a result of that. The only way to avoid a very serious inflation would be a very rapid private sector adjustment to producing much more in goods to compensate for all the net financial assets that were getting added to the economy. So some of the other tweets which accompanied the stream and random comments around them from me first, because someone had suggested to Scott that there are many people who are in favor of BI because they want to harm seniors, okay, and other groups. They want to take away the safety net provisions they have now and provide them instead with only the basic income. And in many cases, the benefits they have now from the government, for example, in the case of seniors through Social Security, actually exceed $1,000 a month. Now, for many others, they're less than $1,000 a month. They might be in the neighborhood of $600 a month or $700 a month, something like that. Those people would benefit from a basic income. Okay, if $1,000 a month, But people who were getting $1,600 a month from Social Security or $1,900 a month or more would lose considerably, and to say the least, there would be a huge mounting of opposition to any such change. And so I asked Scott, would you oppose a UBI if it were designed to harm seniors? And then I said, besides, Social Security payments are currently inadequate. So why reduce them for seniors with a UBI? I also tweeted, in addition, UBI proposals always propose it as a substitute for current safety net benefits to save money, trying to expose that a lot of Scott's views on the UBI, and maybe Keith Ellison's views also, as far as I know, could be about trying to save money, which we as MMTers know is not something the government has to do, or even can do in reality, because government savings don't fund anything. They're destroyed by the Federal Reserve in the process of transferring the savings, or so-called transferring the savings into the Treasury spending account. So then I was asked, or was suggested that no, Scott wouldn't want to hurt seniors. So I pointed out, you would not. But if a UBI grows popular, then you can trust the neoliberals to compromise it with low UBI payments and stingy cost of living increases, while they scream austerity. I didn't have room to add all the way to the bank, as they pocket their $1,000 a month. So, Scott Santen's replied to my comments and those of a number of other people by saying a job guarantee is a terrible idea unless a basic income exists underneath it so as to allow people to refuse make work. And so Lana Dell, who's probably here tonight, replied by saying, that is exactly what we are proposing. Hashtag learn MMT at Joe Firestone, PhD, calls it a JIG, that is a marriage of the UBI and the job guarantee. And then I replied to that by saying, right, but it's not a true UBI, since in my proposal, only those not employed in jobs having either market value or social value would be eligible. Now, I should explain that. When I last had a session on the job guarantee, I explained that in addition to the profit-making sector, there was also a nonprofit sector, and there was also a social entrepreneurial, social value sector, which would be the sector generated in large part by the job guarantee program. So there's a market value sector, which is dedicated to profit. And there's a social value sector, which is dedicated to public purpose. And what's envisioned in the job guarantee program is that these two sectors would be competing for employees to a degree. Of course, the job guarantee sector would not be competing on price. It would set a fixed price, which was a living wage. But until the private sector adjusts and all the companies in the private sector begin to pay a living wage, it would be necessary for the private sector to compete on price if it wanted to retain its workers. By price, I mean they'd have to compete on wages. They would have to pay a higher price for labor than the social entrepreneurial sector using the job guarantee would have to pay. Okay. So, so that sets up a situation where the private sector has to adjust so that it provides a better living to people, and those companies that cannot provide such a living based on private capital alone, if they serve no public purpose as defined by local communities, would have to go out of business. There would be an adjustment in the private sector as an inevitable consequence of a federal job guarantee program at a true living wage with good fringe benefits. So Lynedell continues, the proposal, as I have heard from at Ellison Whittingham, at Joe Firestone, PhD, at SD Grumbine, are not private sector jobs. Instead, they equal community needs. And I replied by saying, in most cases, they will be far more valuable than marketing jobs from a public purpose point of view, or jobs devoted to investigating whether insurance claims ought to be denied to people. There, of course, I was referring to the health insurance companies and their work, very profit-oriented work, involving denying insurance company coverage to people, working hard to deny that coverage by finding technicalities wrong in the execution of their policies, knowing full well that the denial of services and denial, of benefits would result in the deaths of some of those people. I pointed out that jobs investigating claims that attempt to do that, to get the insurance companies off the hook, have far less social value than the jobs that would be created by the local communities. In fact, this would even be true in the case of make work, because the investigated jobs held by people in the private insurance companies are worse than make work because they have negative social value. So, then I followed by saying these jobs are not handouts. They are jobs producing social value as assessed by local communities, knowing what would be valuable to them. Scott Santens replied and said, this is not true. Plus, why would we enact a UBI without including a cost of living adjustment, that is COLA? And he was saying this in response to a gentleman by the name of Mason McClellan, who was charging that a UBI would be inflationary. And McClellan then replied by saying, incorrect argument, the new basis and inflation are not the same, i.e., seniors on SS still struggle on a basic income. And this is true. If the basic income replaced their Social Security income, in many cases, seniors would still struggle. There are many cases where you have a couple, and the men get much higher Social Security payments than their wives. Okay, but the couple together might average, let's say, I don't know, $11.50 a person or $1,200 a person. If that were cut to $1,000 a person because of the presence of a basic income, then their struggles would get harder. Scott replied, seniors are usually retired from the labor force. Most people with a UBI will still be in the labor force earning money on top of it. So that suggests that Scott Santens wasn't talking about a universal basic income at all, that he might be wanting to exempt certain people from the basic income, those people who are already retired from the labor force, and with the exception of perhaps the people who are disabled, he would see people in the labor force who got a basic income as getting their income augmented by the basic income payment. He then went on to say, my point is that a UBI would harm seniors and the disabled. Oh, I'm sorry, this must have been a reply by McClellan. And he said, my point is that the UBI would harm seniors and the disabled and do little to right the inequality. And he pointed out correctly that 95 million people in the United States are not in the U.S. workforce. That's probably an underestimate because it probably excludes children. Scott Santens also tweeted, the way I would do it is to reduce Social Security and add it on top of a basic income. And then he said, well, UBI would not harm seniors unless it were specifically designed to do that. And I replied and put him on the spot and asked, would you oppose a UBI if it were designed to harm seniors? And I also said, besides, Social Security payments currently are inadequate. So why reduce them for seniors with a UBI that would replace their Social Security payments? In other words, it wasn't clear from all the different things Scott said what exactly his proposal for a UBI was. Nor did Keith Ellison clarify what his proposal for a UBI is. And so, we have a situation where a congressman comes forth and asks what people who follow him think of the UBI idea, while saying he's in favor of it but not saying to them what his idea is. Just using UBI as kind of a Rorschach symbol to get reactions from people. In other words, try to get their response to the meme of a UBI rather than a specific UBI proposal itself. Now, there are a number of reasons why we here, okay, at RP have been very opposed to a standalone UBI. Now, Scott Santens seems to have come partway towards us. I don't know if he was there at the beginning or not, but now he seems prepared based on this, these the Twitter threads. He seems to be prepared to concede that a job guarantee on top of a basic income might be all right. Okay, now this thread attracted quite a lot of attention from some of the MMT people because Stephanie sent out an email last week to a number of us to alert us to the thread and to ask other MMT writers what they thought about it. And there were various replies, which I won't go into here, but all were in opposition, okay, of course. There were some interesting things said by Randy Ray, who indicated he doesn't even want to talk about the idea of a BI for fear of activating the favorable image that people have, okay, of a basic income and reinforcing it. And what he would rather talk about is a job guarantee along with the strengthening of the safety net in order to provide subsistence level support for people who don't want to work in either the social value sectors or and also can't find a job in the for-profit sectors, and also don't care to work for either of the two sectors, just would like to sit it out and do what they want to do simply according to their own ideas of how it's valuable to spend their days. Okay, and his view of it, okay, is okay. Such people deserve to live also, but there should certainly be a difference in the extent of support that they get compared to people who work in the job guarantee area, okay, or people who work in the private sector. In other words, the people who don't care to affiliate themselves with any social activities, but who simply want to be alone and completely free, should not have the same claim on societal resources as people who are participating in the labor force and are making a contribution. And many of us would probably agree with that. Maybe even most of us would agree with that. But Scott Santens, who is very much a libertarian, He does not agree with that. So, okay, I listed a number of the tweets in this thread in order to give you a flavor of the thread. Okay, actually, of the two threads. Okay, and in order to get you to understand the issues involved. But it's hard in Twitter to get to all of the issues involved. We did get to the inflation issue somewhat. We could not do a full vetting of that. We didn't have space to explore what I call the inner life of the job guarantee program and compare that to the inner life of the BI program. One begins to wonder what the inner life of a BI program would actually be, because it does not provide for any necessary social affiliations. In other words, what affiliations individuals partake in when they're on a BI is completely up to them. Whereas when they're participating in the social value sector, they have other people to collaborate with, okay, and other people to account to, okay, and to join with in producing something that is judged as socially valuable in line with the public purpose. Okay. Anyway, the Twitter threads so far have not gotten to the point where they're comparing that. But they're still going on. It's not over. Tweets, last I looked, which was about 6 o'clock, were still going back and forth. Scott Santens and some of the other people are not through. Keith Ellison has never replied. He's just watching what's going on. Okay, and it's not really a full discussion of all the aspects of the job guarantee and the value it can bring to people and to communities. In my previous broadcast on the inner life of the job guarantee, we went into that actually fairly deeply. We pointed out how much would be added to local communities by having people participate in defining their own socially valued jobs in the context of the public purpose standard, and how much social value there was in the idea of having community centers where the people would be able to congregate to plan their socially valuable businesses and then to execute their socially valuable businesses. And we talked about the information technology supports that under such a program could be provided to people to get them involved in defining and executing socially valuable projects. I can't think of any parallel structures that would be provided by a basic income program. And the reason why is because the basic idea behind a basic income program is give people $1,000 a month each month. So they always have that as a basis for living and as a basis for subsistence. And then let them do what they want with it. And never mind that if that goes to everybody, that there are many people who are just going to pocket that $1,000 while other people will be constrained to spend that $1,000, thus contributing to development of further wealth inequality in our society, and just exacerbating the dangers we now face from the degree of wealth income inequality that exists. Apart from income inequality, wealth inequality is what's been spawning this concentration of political power in the hands of richer people, going up the pyramid and influencing our political system so that it becomes a more hierarchical political system in which the popular will is never satisfied. So all of that is in the background of the job guarantee versus the basic income issue. Okay, but getting back to the way that Randy wants to frame this, he would like to frame it so that we don't talk about this issue at all. I don't see a way to avoid that. Okay, when Keith Ellison is coming out and saying, I'm for a basic income, okay, and what do you think? Do you agree? Okay, or do you not agree? If you don't agree, then why? I don't see how you can avoid speaking about a basic income and comparing it to a job guarantee and saying, well, the job guarantee is a better program and we can take care of people who don't want to work in the private sector and don't want to work in the job guarantee program through an expansion of Social Security. I mean, I think you can say that, but you can hardly say it without actually mentioning that you prefer that option to the basic income option. And that's basically what we've been saying here, okay, at RP. We've been saying what we believe in is a jig, that is to say, a job guarantee with an income guarantee for those who don't want to or are not able to participate. Okay? So that's where we are on this. Okay, but now we have a problem. And the problem we have is that one of the leaders of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, I believe he was still the co-leader of the Progressive Caucus in the House. And he's the co-chair of the Democratic National Committee of the party, is now saying he likes a basic income and he wants to know what we think about it. And I think we need to tell him en masse that we don't like that idea, that we want a job guarantee at a living wage with people who don't want to work in the job guarantee program and who can't find a job in the private sector to be provided for by an expansion of Social Security. I think we got to tell them that. I think we got to do so in terms that are negative enough and that are annoyed enough and that are emotional enough to get him to back off this now before it becomes something that gets into the platform of the Democratic Party and that we're then stuck with for a generation in the way we've been stuck with the Affordable Care Act. And even when people talk about improving or getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, they immediately jump to the public option trick sparkle pony. This basic income guarantee idea is another trick, sparkle, pony. It's another shiny object. It's not going to meet the equality problems we have in our society. It's not going to fundamentally change the position of people who are marginal in the private sector and who have been unemployed and need to have other means of support. The basic income people deny the idea that most people in our society need the support of work, not just the financial support, but they need the status support. They need the social support. They need the social affiliations. They need the sense of doing something valuable. They need the sense of doing something that is in line with public purpose. Ginger Duran says, does anyone have contact information for Keith Ellison? Yeah, I'm sure there's contact information for Keith Ellison. But what I'd like you to do initially is to go to Keith's Twitter feed to find the link that I gave you and to descend on him en masse. I want him to know that the progressive community doesn't like the basic income, that the basic income is a right-wing idea, descended from Milton Friedman, and that we know it's a dodge to keep things the same while appearing to change them, that we know that there's a risk of inflation connected with it. We know that it doesn't provide anything on a continuing basis to blighted local communities, that it doesn't do anything for those communities and the people who are living in them. If people are trapped in communities which are close to destruction, this doesn't give people an alternative. It doesn't give people a choice to leave those communities and find a job in a thriving part of the economy. Because people would not be able to find a transitional job if they wanted to go from Flint, Michigan to Colorado, for example. They still wouldn't have the money to go because they wouldn't have a guaranteed job at the other end. Whereas the federal job guarantee at a living wage gives them that. It gives them mobility. It gives them choice. It gives them a much greater degree of freedom than a mere $1,000 a month would give them. And by the way, at a fraction of the cost. At a fraction of the cost. Okay. I want you to keep in mind that even the expensive job guarantee program, okay, that I envision, because it would involve giving people a true living wage with full fringe benefits, won't be more than $500 to $600 billion a year at initiation, and then would quickly, over a period of 6 months to a year, be reduced to an annual level of perhaps $200 to $250 billion, a fraction of even the $900 billion that Scott Santens was suggesting and only a fraction of that $4 trillion figure, which is implied by having a true universal basic income. So the job guarantee would be much less money to implement. And even if 3 million people remained outside both the private sector and the job guarantee program, when you're giving 3 million people, let's say $1,000 a month, that costs a hell of a lot less than giving 330 million people $1,000 a month. Now, when I say it costs less, I'm not worried about balancing the budget. I'm not worried about reducing the deficit. In fact, unlike Scott Santon's, I'd probably want a deficit spend in this. However, what I do want to remind everybody about is that even though the government can spend whatever it has to spend for a particular purpose because it has no solvency constraints, I do want to remind people that even though this is true, the policy constraints provided by the possibility of adding too much in net financial assets so that you get an inflationary economy, that's a real policy constraint. If, let's say, for the sake of argument, we have $1.9 trillion in deficit spending policy space within our economy right now, and that's probably a liberal estimate, if we implemented a program that was going to cost $900 billion in, say, deficit spending, and I note that Scott Santon's wants to offset it all, but we may not all agree with him in the way he wants to offset it all. So let's say it might be passed with $900 billion in deficit spending. That would be a very major use of the policy space that we have currently. And we need to use that space for HR 676, for programs that will solve the climate change problem, for education programs, for federal student loan programs, that is a debt jubilee for students, and for all manner of other needs, infrastructure needs we've neglected over the years because we've emphasized only private sector spending and no public sector spending. In other words, if such a basic income program were to involve any deficit spending at all, that would be a big mark against it, because in terms of benefits, it's not a very positive program anyway. So to use precious policy space for that, rather than things that will lower inequality and that will contribute to other areas of public purpose, is not, to my mind, a good use of our policy space. Now, what I would like you to do is once again to organize yourselves and get to Keith Ellison and get to the Congressional Progressive Caucus and tell them to forget about a universal basic income, to just forget about it. that what we need is a true automatic stabilizer. We need a federal job guarantee dedicated to social value and to public purpose. And for the small number of people that don't want to participate in such a program and cannot find jobs in the private sector or don't want them in the private sector, we can make alternative provision for them in the Social Security safety net and emphasize to them that's where that need belongs, not in a program that's designed to stabilize our economy and to lift it up and to reduce inequality at the same time. It does not belong in that kind of program. It belongs in the social safety net. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is give you the thread again. You can go there right now. Okay, it's https:// twitter.com / Keith Ellison / status / 898-3070 4328 2628 608. When I get through with this broadcast, I will add a comment and I will give you the Twitter thread again. Okay, in fact, if you can remember it up through Keith Ellison / status, I will give you the final number right now. 898-3070 4328 2628 608. If you go there, then you can get that thread and you can participate. Okay, and if you can produce 100 tweets from different people, then I think that's going to have quite an impact on Keith Ellison. And let him know that there is a progressive group out there that is dead set against that. Now, he's been having problems with progressive groups of late because it looks like he's gravitating towards the Democratic center. Time for us to pull him up short and to let him know that we're not having any of that anymore. Let's flex our muscles, folks. Let's get it done. Okay. So that's what I wanted to say about the job guarantee tonight. What I also want to do is to make a comment about what's been going on in the reaction to Charlottesville. There are all kinds of actions protesting what went on in Charlottesville. Lots of energy that's being expended in these protests. Lots of energy, lots of resources, lots of news focus. There's a lot of focus still on Charlottesville. Again and again, feeding into the narrative about how we have to impeach Donald Trump. Now, I will say, I'm all for the impeachment, of Donald Trump. I think that Donald Trump is a very grave danger and has been from the beginning in having the power of the presidency in his hands. Now, I have to say, I think Mike Pence is going to do a lot of bad things too. And that he might even find ways of being even more damaging in a quiet way. So we're going to have a fight on our hands with Mike Pence also. There's no question about that. But Mike Pence won't be so open about things as Trump. And he's unlikely to encourage the Nazis in the same way and help them to build their movement. Because whatever else Mike Pence is, and however reprehensible he is, he's not a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer or a Nazi fellow traveler. There's been no sign of that in his background. So, even though to have him in the presidency won't be good, and even though we'll have a tremendous fight on our hands in stopping Ryan from Pence in colluding to impose even harsher austerity than we have now, to my mind, that's a fight in which fewer people are going to lose their lives. And it's a fight, well, I think all the fights are fights, that we can win. But I think that fight against them is going to be a little less fraught with risk that the whole thing is going to blow up in our faces. So I'm aware of that. You might not all share that opinion. There might still be a lot of people who think that Trump is the lesser danger than a lot of the regular, the machine Republicans. Well, all I can say is I have a different opinion about that. It's a considered opinion. It's based on study of the history of rise of totalitarian countries. It's based on a deep knowledge of conflict, in international affairs. I spent a lot of my early career in that and in the study of civil strife and violence during the 1970s. I think I know that field and its parameters extremely well. And I'm telling you, my original opinion that Trump and his rule was fraught with danger for us has not changed. So, I'm in favor of impeachment efforts. I'm in favor of supporting that. But I am not afraid of obsessing over it. But I am afraid of obsessing over it and treating it as a continuing shiny object that is used by the mainstream Democrats, by the Republicans, and by the establishment press to divert ourselves from our underlying problems that created the conditions out of which the Trump presidency has emerged. I am completely on guard against that. I am completely against that. There's all kinds of coverage going on about these efforts to impeach Trump, and all this attention being paid to organize against him. While this goes on, we need to organize for change. We need to organize for trade deals that don't contain the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism that compromises the sovereignty of our nation and the sovereignty of any democracy that we might succeed in establishing down the road. We can't compromise those things. We cannot compromise our drive towards Medicare for all because people are dying in the many thousands because we don't have that. We have to continue the fight for that. We have to continue to fight for a job guarantee because many people have died because that was not available and because we used the buffer stock of the unemployed. And because in using that kind of buffer stock, we've had GDP that's been falling short where it could have been now for, 50 years? It's always fallen short. We've probably sacrificed $15 trillion off our GDP over that period of time because of our inexcusable and continuing austerity-minded policies. This is what has created the conditions where the threat of totalitarianism has been able to emerge in the United States. And even if we get rid of Trump, the threat of somebody else more competent at totalitarianism actually emerging is still there. And it will be there until we handle these underlying problems. So we cannot stop. We cannot stop. Okay, now I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch to questions and commenting on comments. I see Rocco Million says, fiat money has no intrinsic value. Its value is personal. You can satisfy tax obligations. That personal value doesn't change simply from increasing our money supply. That's right, not from our money supply alone. But not only would I say that fiat money doesn't have any intrinsic value, it seems to me that other kinds of money do not have intrinsic value either. In a sense, all money as we know it is a creation of the state. Even gold, taken as currency or coins, was a creation of the state in the sense that the state designated that as a proper medium for paying taxes. Other than that, the value of gold was not intrinsic. It was extrinsic. You got gold in order to decorate your ladies, or you got gold in order to use it for industrial purposes, or you got gold for 100 other reasons. But it was a very rare person who, like a greedy King Midas, would get what we call in psychology consummatory value from rubbing the gold. In other words, gold in itself is not a consumption value. It has been, for humans, a tool. It's been a very valuable tool. But I can't think of any currency that has had a consumption value. Currency and money have been tools for acquiring things that have an instrumental value or a consummatory value. Okay, Ellison Drucker says, Twitter bombed. Last one was this link, since I'm finding it difficult to get too many ideas across in the space constraint of the tweet. And then she cites a link from Jacobin magazine on federal job guarantee versus a universal basic income. I don't know what you mean by Twitter bombed, but there is an art towards constructing a tweet storm comprised of a series of tweets that is able to deliver a more complex message. One of the best people at practicing this art I've seen is Matt Stoller. He does good tweet storms, I'll tell you that. You have to organize your thoughts, and you have to keep each of the individual statements within 140 characters. And it's hard. It takes a little bit of effort. But it's well worth it, because people going at it with single 140 character statements cannot actually compete with that. Any questions? I see a lot of comments. Is investment in labor for regenerative environmental activities going to be inflationary over time? If we invest an extraordinary amount into regenerating local landscapes and biodiversity, there will be more dollars for labor created than products. I don't think so. I think that we create products to help us to regenerate our environments. There are material products involved in that sort of process. And there are other values also. So I don't really see that that's going to be inflationary over time. Now, I can't say whether in certain individual areas of the economy there will not be inflation. There might be shortages in certain areas where now a huge number of people with money want very scarce products, as there was in the 1970s when oil was artificially kept scarce. And there was enough money in the economy for people to stress the amount of supply that was in the marketplace and force the price of supply up. That, of course, was cost-push inflation, not actually demand-pull inflation. I think to get around this, you have to think of a regenerated environment as a product that is worth an enormous amount to us. It's a commons that people can share and that people are able to enjoy. And so the value we place on it, I think, is justified. And as long as the basic energy we gain from doing that, and I mean energy in a material sense, can help us to provide certain products at a lower cost. Okay, I don't think that that is going to be inflationary. Now, of course, there's always a chance, okay, that it is. But if it is going to be inflationary, then we'll have to control that, because we really don't have any choice when it comes to regenerating our environment. We really don't have any choice when it comes to saving our climate. These are things we have to do for the sakes of our children and our grandchildren and for ourselves. Stopping climate change is a matter of life and death for many millions of people, perhaps for all of us. So, if it puts too much pressure on our ability to produce certain things that everybody wants, then people are just in the end going to have to cut back on those things. And if that's necessary for life, that's what people are going to do. So Russell Gorman says, I have a Twitter account, but I don't really know Twitter. What is a good comment? What a good comment is depends upon your thinking through what people are saying and where you want them to go, where you want to steer them in terms of the discussion. So, for example, in a case of what Scott Santens, was doing here, it seemed to me that Keith Ellison's ideas on basic income were likely pretty superficial, because he probably hasn't had a lot of time to study it, and to study it in relation to alternative proposals. And so it seemed to me that his tweet was about trying to get information from people about how they saw the idea, and maybe about getting people to provide him with their views of the difficulties and with their views about how they felt about it, so that he could assess it from a political point of view. Now, Scott Santens replied, and his intention was, of course, to reinforce Keith's thinking on it and to persuade him that, boy, having a universal basic income was a wonderful idea and was the right thing to do. And, of course, to undermine Scott's persuasiveness in this context, what has to be done is to get Scott to come clean about all the complexities involved in passing a basic income, in funding a basic income, in all the impacts and consequences of the specific basic income proposal which he advocated, and in getting him to begin to expose some of these complexities, we could begin to get Keith's office, which undoubtedly is watching this stream, to begin, I'm not talking about this live stream, I'm talking about the Twitter stream, uh, that it would get people on his staff to realize how complex this area can be and how complex any problem or any program that's got suggested might be to get passed from a political point of view. I mean, in Keith's program, I'm sorry, in Scott's program, okay, in his proposal, the implications of it are that a lot of oxes would be gored. There's no question about that. Okay. A lot of programs currently existing would be cut back or would go by the board. Programs that were now benefiting people. His proposals would generate all kinds of memes about what he was trying to do to programs that people depend on and that are well loved and that people want to see expanded rather than contracted, okay, or ended. So there's a whole political hornet's nest which is present in the basic income guarantee proposals. And this is a message that we want to convey to Keith, that he's stepping on a hornet's nest, that he's buying himself a world of trouble if he comes out for basic income. Now, of course, the job guarantee gores some oxes too. Certainly, there are many, many companies in the private sector who have no appetite for suddenly finding that their wage bill is raised to an average of $18 an hour or $20 an hour per wage earner. That would really put a dent in the Walton's pocketbook. However, it's clear who the people are and what the industries are that will have problems in adjusting to this. And it's also clear that those people are not most of the people, and that they're nowhere near the number of people who would benefit from a job guarantee if we can make the case. Because a job guarantee that is paid at a living wage not only stabilizes the economy, not only delivers real material benefits to many, many people who are now going without or who are now struggling, but when wage standards are raised for people currently without jobs in our economy and raised by double or more, then that percolates up the ladder to people in general. Suddenly, because of the increased consumption, there's more money available to meet the demands of the middle class for higher wages. Over time, the increased consumption at the bottom then betters everybody's life. The expanded economy betters everybody's life. It may reduce the level of inequality between the rich and the rest of us. But I think that's the major negative outcome of a program like the job guarantee. And there are so many positive outcomes, Kate, that outweigh that. And so much greater sense of security created by that than any sort of basic income program, simply delivering $1,000 a month to everybody in the United States. So, okay, any other questions or comments? Just an observation, says Ginger Duran. I'm seeing a surcharge on restaurant bills for wage increases. I view this as a corporate attempt to play mind games with people on a living wage. Shameful. Well, I agree this is shameful. I understand that particular mind game, and they can play it all they want. But I think they'll stop playing it when they start to see those workers show up at their restaurants with enough money to buy dinner. And of course, in the restaurant business, the forces of competition are quite strong. There is a market there. It's not the kind of market that's highly concentrated, and the restaurants will still have to compete with one another. So even though they might like to cover the wage increases completely with higher prices, they will not be able to do that. They will have to absorb losses for a little while until the new business gets to them. Then eventually, with the market for people who want to eat out and have the means expanding, they will begin to gain, and they will love it. Other comments or questions? So Douglas Saratan says, who died and decided the top 1% gets 90% of benefits advanced by all society and least of all themselves? Top 1% has already taken everything. Biggest taxes, biggest net taxers, and biggest net negative producers. No one should be a billionaire, period. Well, in many ways, I share that sentiment. I can certainly empathize with it. But for now, our mission has to be to lift up the 90% and even the 99%, and not to tear down by the 1%. Okay, and in addition, who died has been the Democratic Party, which today appears to be a zombie, a mere shadow of its former self. As Carla McIntosh says, Yes, we need to focus on the masses. Yes, we do. And Gray Lewis says, quoting Stephanie Kelton, money doesn't grow on rich people. No, the money doesn't grow on rich people. They grow their fortunes through taking it from others in various ways. Some legitimate and some not so legitimate, like the mortgage frauds, for example. And Rocco Million says, we need to end austerity first. And Danielle Atkinson agrees with him. And Russell Gallman says, he likes that idea. The point is not to tear down the 1%, but to lift up the 99%. Robert Marsh, who died? The Democratic Party. Exactly. Bingo. Love. Yeah, I'm afraid that is what happened, that the Democratic Party died. And we missed the funeral. And now we got a zombie walking around. I think we need to have our funeral and then have a new party that serves us. And we need to build that party. And Gray Lewis says, after being caught stealing from the Osage tribe, David Cox said, I want my fair share, and that's all of it. Yeah, the Cox have said some very memorable things like, I got my money in the old-fashioned way. I inherited it. That's how deserving I am. That's how entitled I am. I inherited it. Do I think 25 to 30 an hour is too high for the job guarantee? And what is your opinion of that? Well, my opinion of it is that the MMT job guarantee position is and always has been that the job guarantee wage should be set at a living wage set at a living wage. Now, what I'm for is recognizing that each area of the country has a living wage that is different. And so the living wages in the job guarantee program should be cost adjusted for each area of the country. Now, I don't think it's true that a living wage for the rural areas of Kansas is $28 an hour. It's probably lower than that. To set it fairly, we'd probably need to look at the CPI statistics. But there are many areas of the country which don't require a living wage of $28 to $30. Now, whether that requirement is there for New York City, for Los Angeles, for Fairbanks, Alaska. I don't know what a living wage would be for those places, but I expect it would be considerably higher than the average living wage for the country. But my view is we need to be honest about calculating what that living wage should be. We don't want to be nickel and diming people. We want to be setting the minimum wage level at our honest assessment of what it costs to live in a particular area of the country and set that as the level of pay for the job guarantee, knowing that that will become the minimum wage in each of the local areas involved. Allison Drucker says the house I rent in South Key almost $2,000 where I moved from. Yes, that's right. And I think there are houses that you can rent still in some areas of Pennsylvania for $600 a month. And I know that if you go to Ironwood, which is the Upper Peninsula, okay, in Michigan, I have a friend who lives there. In that area of the country, rents are pretty low indeed. So there are big differences, okay, among areas of the country, and that needs to be recognized in setting the living wage. Yeah, Bob Work says you have to consider the true cost of living in an area. Yes, you do. Okay, any other questions, comments? Ginger Durant says it should be regionally determined. No one should have to live in a rat trap for $500 a month just to have a place to live. And Rocco Million says, yes, I pay $450 a month in the Rust Belt in Pennsylvania. I expect it might be quite inexpensive in certain areas of Detroit also. So there should be a yearly COLA. I don't think there should be a yearly COLA for the job guarantee program. And the reason why is one of the objectives we're trying to accomplish with the job guarantee program is price stability. We want full employment with price stability. And we think that the living wage, in fact, is much higher than is what is paid now. So we're all for paying that living wage and having the private sector adjust as it must, because we don't think it's in accord with public purpose for the private sector to be able to pay less than a living wage. Businesses that must do that, if they want to stay in business, should have to demonstrate a public purpose so that we could subsidize them through programs designed to serve the public purpose. But businesses that are there for private purposes should not have a claim on public money and on public subsidies to keep themselves in business. They should have to pay a living wage. But once the living wage is reached, then it's important that lifting that wage each year should not continue to drive the cost of labor up. So I think what MMT economists are for is keeping the living wage steady for a time, waiting for the economy to adjust. The inflation goal, of MMT, in other words, not to put too much of a fine point on it, but our inflation goal is not 4% or 3% or 2%. When we say price stability, we mean 0% change in the real cost of living. That's what we mean. And the job guarantee is one of our tools for getting there. Now, I'm sure some of us would value full employment more. I personally do. But price stability is one of our goals too, which we think is in accord with public purpose. So no, we would not be for COLAs each year in relation to the living wage. That's another difference from the basic income guarantee people. They want to have a COLA each year to compensate for any inflation they may cause. Our attitude on that is the opposite. Would there be COLAs occasionally, sometime? Yes, there would be. If we failed in our efforts at price stability and real cost of living went up over a period, say 5 years or something like that, then we would approve of COLAs to make the living wage a living wage again. I'm getting some thank yous for taking the time. I guess that means people are getting tired. Okay, Renee said she was sorry for being distracting. Don't worry, Renee. Okay, I didn't really find you distracting. It was quite all right to raise questions. I don't really have a problem with questions. So thank you for coming, and I hope we'll see you again. Okay, any other questions or comments? So Gregory Paul Smith says, productivity increases, but wages don't increase. How will you handle that? How do we deal with that? Well, if productivity increases, but wages do not increase, then someone is pocketing then the excessive profits involved in that. And we will begin to see that in asset inflation rather than in income inflation for the population at large. When we begin to see that asset inflation and that increasing concentration in wealth, then I think one way to handle it is to raise the living wage. Because the asset inflation is going to have effect on the cost of living in various areas and will be reflected in the CPI and in price increases. Anthony Martin says, 2 people work in a city for a huge wage and buy 15 people's worth of resources in another country. Well, okay, the way I think that needs to be handled is that the other country has to be running its own economic policies for the public purpose so that they stop that kind of thing. They can stop using their sovereign power the grabbing of resources by rich people coming from the United States who want to grab resources into their nations. Of course, now we have international trade treaties that prohibit these kinds of restrictions. As you know, in my view, we need to get rid of those treaties. Allison Drucker says county, not country. So you're saying people go from one county where wages are high, and then they move to another county where they consume a lot more resources in that particular county. Well, if they pay money to consume the resources of that particular county, they're going to be bringing a lot more money into that particular county and spending it, which is going to begin to raise incomes in that particular county. If we're talking about differences among the counties of the United States, and begin to bring new private sector businesses to those counties and begin to ease the problems that exist in those dead counties. So that's what a common market actually does for us. That's what a unified nation actually does for us. It brings the possibility of those kinds of adjustments. Robert Marsh says, should we have job guarantee tiers, different levels of salary for professional versus unskilled workers? No, I don't think so. And the reason why is because we need a general level of an employed buffer stock where people can continue to have a living wage. But if they are skilled workers, okay, if they are professionals whose skills are no longer needed in the private economy and are no longer needed in the government, then probably the need for those skills is disappearing from the economy. And the people involved will have to get some new skills. One thing the job guarantee provides is through its social entrepreneurial programs, it will create the possibility for professionals whose skills are no longer demanded by the private sector or by government to be able to develop some new skills. And one of the ways in which job guarantee programs would be structured would be to have training go on in the context, okay, of new social entrepreneurial ventures which would get started within the job guarantee program. So, Gregory Paul Smith says, oh, I guess I missed that. So we need to enact policies that end wage suppression. Yes. There are some MMT-based policies, that is, some MMT writers, I think probably most MMT writers, advocate zero interest rate policies on the part of the Federal Reserve on a continuous basis. No monetary policies to control inflation. Sole use of fiscal policy to control inflation. So, no more wage suppression by the Federal Reserve. Laws to prevent private sector companies from engaging in wage suppression activities, such as interfering with the unionizers who may want to bring a union shop to their businesses. Yes, most MMT economists want to have policies to end wage suppression. Certainly any wage suppression being conducted by the government. Now, that's with one exception. If inflation does get out of control, if there are real serious wage inflation problems, then wage and price controls are perfectly in order from an MMT viewpoint. I don't think I've encountered an MMTer yet who does not believe that under certain conditions wage and price controls have their place, as for example in World War II conditions. So Robert Marsh says if a skilled worker is laid off, then the employer can rehire that same person at lower wages. Well, not really. If an employer lays off a skilled worker and then the economy starts to recover and there's a need for the skilled worker again, then generally speaking, it won't only be at that one company that laid off the skilled worker in the first place. If the market appears to have woken up and the skilled worker is in general demand, then the former employee would be in a position to demand their previous salary as a condition for going back. Now, I know it doesn't always work that way in the real world, but if we're talking about a general economic recovery, making the skill a very desirable one again, then the bargaining power would be there for the worker, and they would be in a much better position to use it because of the existence of the job guarantee, and they're having taken advantage of the job guarantee, because then their financial resources would not have become so stressed that they would not be in a position to bargain. They would not be in a take it or leave it position any longer. And Carla McIntosh suggests job training, like from fossil fuels to sustainable options. Yes, but not necessarily in kind of a pure, highly styled job training kind of context such as the ones we're used to. It might be more in the context of social entrepreneurial ventures where the people starting the venture would have government support to start up the venture, and then would be in a position to train themselves as they got the venture going, to learn how to solve certain problems and do certain things and acquire skills in the context of getting a new company up and running. That might be more of the model within a social entrepreneurial sector and a federal job training program. I would hope so. I would hope so. Can a job guarantee program pay people to be students through high school and through college? Well, that would not be the function of the job guarantee program. There would be another MMT-based program, which would be devoted to, to providing free college and providing support for students to go to high school, okay, and to go to college. That would be part of the safety net, not part, not generally part of the job guarantee program. But in the context of the job guarantee program, if certain skills were needed to perform a particular job in the job guarantee program, and you had an employee that was hired for a venture that needed those kinds of skills, then the venture could well be in the position to provide that training for the employee while the employee was on the job. Why provide the training while the employee was on the job? Why not? Some said, okay, you can have the job if you don't get this training. Because if the social entrepreneurial venture wants that particular person for their venture, and they're not going to pay that person starting right now, but are going to wait for the training to be completed, then there are many other social entrepreneurial ventures that would be forming that would be ready to offer that particular person a job starting right then. Okay, so it would kind of become a requirement that if a person needed on-the-job training and they couldn't find someone who had it, that the only choice of the social entrepreneurial venture would be to provide that training for the employee. Okay. At any rate, we have to emphasize here the local control aspect in the job guarantee program. Whether that sort of thing would be included in a local program or not, okay, and in the ventures funded by the local program, would be up to the local community. If the local community thought that the social venture was performing a real public purpose function for their community, and they wanted that function, then they would be constrained to support the on-the-job training also, because that would be a prerequisite for getting the job done. So Jason Atkinson says, I hope the UBI doesn't get used to making some sort of grand bargain, doesn't get used to make some sort of grand bargain. And he mentions that there are many Democrats who've been trying to achieve that for years. Yeah, Jason, I think that is one of the dangers of a basic income guarantee program. It's the kind of program that gets very susceptible to bargaining with conservatives, whose interest it is to have a basic income guarantee that just keeps people barely at the subsistence level and in a constant struggle to stay alive, because that is the kind of program that is least likely to cause the community to have to raise taxes on them, which is the thing they would least like to see from social safety net programs. So yes, I think that would be one thing to watch out for. And that's one thing that suggests that beginning to bargain and politicize and organize around a basic income guarantee is the wrong thing to do. We want something that's going to solve a lot of economic problems and a lot of social problems and a lot of inequality problems all at once. And that's what the job guarantee program offers. And Gregory Paul Smith, what about incentives to divest from fossil fuels and reinvest in green energy? There I favor a carrot and stick approach. We might offer some incentives. We also might offer some regulations, or have regulations increasing the costs of fossil fuel investments and fossil fuel businesses, so that we begin to externalize the real costs of such businesses on on the environment and on climate change, thus making the costs of those businesses, the social costs and the economic costs and the environmental costs, very visible to prospective investors, and giving them considerable incentive to disinvest in those kinds of things. Robert Marsh says, thanks for your explanations, Joe. Makes it a lot clearer for me. I was suffering from some short-sightedness. Robert, we all suffer from short-sightedness, occasionally and to some extent. I'm sure in the future you'll be pointing out to me that some things I'm suggesting are short-sighted. And Rocco Million says, Greg,
water?
I still have some, thanks. Says, we don't need to. If government deficits to develop green, clean infrastructure, once that green energy meets our output needs, fossil fuels are gone. Well, of course, there's a lot of truth to that. We are rapidly reaching the point now where green energy costs less than fossil fuels. Of course, if we were serious about externalizing the real costs of the fossil fuel industry, then it would be apparent right now that the fossil fuel industries were priced out of the market. But more and more green energy is coming online. The process is really accelerating right now. There's news each day of possible battery breakthroughs. We may only be looking at a few years, okay, until getting rid of fossil fuels entirely begins to seem like it will be the reality in short order. Really, things are moving very, very fast now. And some of the battery breakthroughs we've been looking for are likely to be at hand real soon now, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years. So things are really, really happening fast. Of course, the United States is lagging behind in that industry because we've been acting like fucking idiots. I can't emphasize that too heavily. And you know, I don't go around throwing these words out too often. Robert Marx says, I would like to see the managers making the same living wage of the people placed in job guaranteed jobs. Well, I don't think we can do that in the private sector. I think in the job guarantee program, when the job guarantee employees are working together to start a new social entrepreneurial venture, and all the employees are getting paid the same living wage, and there would be no difference, okay, between the managers and the non-managers in that particular context. If we have a situation where the social entrepreneurial venture supported by the job guarantee program wants to then change to a nonprofit venture, then you might begin to have a situation where the managers would get more than the the other workers in the venture. But in such a nonprofit, you would never get the kind of inequalities in pay that we see in the companies in the profit-making sector. But in terms of the thought behind that, I do appreciate the idea that our managers in the private sector make far too much today, especially our top executives, and that at some point, though I don't think this is an immediate priority, I would set it as a long-term one. But I think in the interest of equity, okay, and justice, we have to get that ratio of the highest salary to the lowest salary down to where it used to be. That is 30 to 1 or 35 to 1 or something like that, and stop these outrageous situations where the ratio of the CEO of a company to the lowest level worker is 1,000 to 1 or 500 to 1 or even 350 to 1. That kind of practice has been a really big factor in creating these huge clumps, okay, of inequality in our country, and creating the kind of asset inflation that we see, okay, in our country, and creating the political inequality that we see in our country too. And Barbara Wernig says, Joe, your page. Well, Barbara, I'm not exactly sure what you mean there, but if you're talking about what my website is, my personal website is www.josephmfirestone, no periods, of course, .com. Okay, so www.josephmfirestone.com. Simple enough. And I have a website there where I do occasional blogging and where I offer myself up as a speaker and where I advertise and promote my books. So that site is devoted to that. Most of my work these days, though, is happening here, okay, at RP. I'm helping to organize RP into a company, and of course, I have my show on Saturday night, and I keep trying to get organized to do frequent live streams, but somehow that has proven harder than I thought it would be. But I'm not giving up. I expect to be live streaming frequently pretty soon now. So Russell Gorman says, F-bomb alerts. Okay, and Bonnie is bringing me a glass of wine. Okay, my wife Bonnie is bringing me a glass of wine, which I think is the signal for saying that I need to be getting out of here pretty soon. So I'll entertain a couple of last questions, and then I think we're going to call it quits for the evening. Are there any last questions or comments? Gregory Paul Smith says, yeah, monetize the externalities, make the fossil fuel industry pay the real cost for their business model. People have been saying that now, Greg, for 50 years. And it's just been impossible to get that done. But we really, really ought to. We really, really ought to. That would quickly end our use of fossil fuels. It would melt away to nothing in a very, very short time. Anthony Martin asks, will these ventures be cooperatively owned, or how do cooperatives come into play with a job guarantee? Thanks again for taking this time with us. That's going to depend on the local communities. Okay, if the local communities want to spawn these kinds of social entrepreneurial ventures that are cooperatively owned and qualify them for job guarantee support, then in the job guarantee program we envision that would be part of the local program. It might vary from locality to locality, but it could become the practice all across the country, but very quickly, and could change the nature of the economy here in the United States by rapidly and drastically expanding the cooperative and the collaborative sector of the economy. I think that would be a wonderful thing. It would really help to democratize the workplace, and it would really help to bring a lot of job satisfaction to people. Now, the opportunities for excessive income, of course, would not be present, but okay, I have a feeling that that kind of arrangement of much of our economy would bring a great deal more happiness than we find in the kinds of arrangements we have right now. And since the pursuit of happiness is supposed to be what we're about, that's probably a very good thing. Tricia says, oh my, better than water, Joe. Yeah, I think you're talking about the wine, Trish. Yeah, I think sometimes that's better than water. But on the other hand, sometimes there's nothing better than water. Trish says, make the animal agriculture industry pay for the real costs of their industry, and let's all go vegan. Well, I really have a lot of sympathy for veganism, and I've been thinking about it, and especially since I've been watching your videos, Trish. And I certainly completely agree with making the animal agriculture industry pay for the real costs of what it is that they do to us and to the environment. And I foresee certainly a drifting over time towards veganism and towards healthier living. Whether I personally am ready to get there, I don't know. But I'm probably 2/3 of the way there now. So all I've got to do is get to that final third. In fact, maybe it's not even a final third. I mean, maybe it's more like the final sixth. Because a lot of my dinners are vegan also. And organic as well. I used to be a very big beef eater. I don't eat any beef anymore. I don't eat any lamb anymore. I do eat some other meat, though. And I've been seriously thinking of cutting back on that. And then finally ending the practice. And the more of your stuff I watch, the more this all weighs on my conscience. So thank you, Trish. And Trish shows her website. Oh, I guess that didn't take. Okay, let me get that up there. Always here to assist. howtogovegan.org. Well, I'm sure I'll be visiting there, Trish. Okay, so on that note, unless there are very strong objections, I think I'm ready to end for this Saturday night. I do want to repeat, though, the message of the night, which is please, please, please go after Keith Ellison on this particular Twitter thread. Make him see that basic income is problematic. That basic income is not what we want to do. It's not what he wants to support. It's not a hornet's nest that he wants to step on. We need to stop it now, nip it in the bud. And we need to flex our muscles too and see if we can do it. So go get them, folks. Go get them. And thank you very much for coming tonight and for engaging with each other and for engaging with me. I'll see you soon.